So I'm making this quilt out of knitted sweaters from a friend's mother-in-law who passed away, and making that first cut is always very nerve-wracking, and I just cut off the sleeve to one of the sweaters that I'm going to be using.
It's the end of my pregnancy.
I've never actually sewn a quilt using knitted sweaters before, so this is something completely different from anything that I've ever done. On the first quilt that I made for her, I actually used a knitted scarf in that quilt, and I know it's possible to sew with literal knitted sweater fabric. It's just a matter of doing it right, and all of these will be appliqued on to the quilt. But basically what I'm gonna do is I cut out a bunch of circles on cardstock, and each one of these circles is a different size. So I have a 6-inch circle, a 5-inch circle, 4-inch circle, and a 3-inch circle. You know, I love quilting because you can kind of make it your own. You can make it however you want. And this person is giving me a lot of just creative reign to make this, which makes me very nervous because what I like, you know, I don't know if she'll like. But she did give me the general idea of what she wanted and just told me to go about it however. So all of these little circles are going to be my little baubles on the Christmas tree. And I'll put a picture in here so you can see what I'm talking about. But all of these are my little baubles for my Christmas tree. I'm just gonna pin these and start cutting them out now. So I'm using these little tiny pins, and I'm thinking this is gonna be a pain in the butt because it doesn't catch that much fabric. And what I'm worried about is the knit fabric kind of stretching too much when I cut it. So what I could do is I could get a piece of interfacing, and I could interface this whole thing. That way the knit part won't stretch as much when I cut it, which would probably be the smartest thing to do. So when I make my t-shirt quilts, I usually use this t-shirt quilt interfacing, and this is from June Taylor. There are some probably cheaper options for t-shirt quilt. I think this is like $20 for this whole pack. It does have quite a bit in here, and the reason I like it is because it's 100% cotton. The material is just a lot different. It's a lot thicker than the fusible interfacing that you would get off the bolt. But again, this is a little bit more expensive, so I would always use this if you can use a coupon, or I would buy this if you can use a coupon. I'm not gonna cut out the interfacing to fit this entire thing. I'm just gonna go bit by bit. I like the knit side better. I mean, I could still do it on the purl side. So what I could do if I wanted some sort of different texture, I could always use the purling side of the sweater, but I'm going to use the knitted side of the sweater just because I think knitting just looks nicer. So I'm going to make sure that I put the interfacing that I just cut off on the wrong side of the fabric, which is the purling side of the fabric. And I'm going to make sure the bumpy side goes on my fabric here. It's going to kind of go off a little bit, but I'm going to smooth out this sleeve. And you know what? I might actually press it a little bit. I'm going to iron it just a bit. I definitely would use a pressing cloth if you're ironing any sort of knit fabric. You don't want to mess everything up, and I have my iron set on like a 3, so it's not very hot. But the pressing cloth is just going to help protect the sweater. Well, that looks a lot better, and that sits a lot flatter. So now I'm going to put my interfacing down. So just make sure whenever you're using interfacing that you go back and double check and make sure that it actually has adhered to your fabric. Let's see, that seems to be sufficiently stuck. So I'm gonna let this cool for a minute because I don't want to cut anything while it's still hot. But just so you can see a difference in the fabric. So this side has no interfacing on it whatsoever. This side does. It drapes different, but this has more body and it's a lot easier to work with than this side. And I think that interfacing this was definitely a good call. So now I'm going to take my 3-inch circle and I'm going to pin it. Here's my first circle. Basically what I'm doing is I'm just taking this quilt basting spray from June Taylor and I'm spraying each of my individual circles on my quilt so that it will stick in place. I thought about using this heat and bond. I didn't want to use the heat and bond just because it would use so much, and it already has interfacing on the back that I use to make it sturdy. So I just didn't want to take the extra step to cut out a bajillion circles again. The one thing that I did put heat and bond on was the star on the top, just because this is just regular fabric. So I don't know if you can see, probably not because the lighting is horrible, but I'll just iron this down and put it in place. So ignore the the mess in the background. This is my life. This is my office. It is not, oh no. Oh, you just hit your forehead. Are you okay? Oh no. Hold that thought. What I ended up doing for this quilt is I ended up laying all of this out on Cricut Design Space because the person I'm making this quilt for, she had a specific design in mind, but I couldn't find a pattern for it and I didn't want to pay for a pattern, so I made it myself. So like I said, I just used all of this on Cricut Design Space, cut out a bunch of different size circles, and then for the base of my quilt, I just ended up cutting out a huge trapezoid piece with my Cricut, and using the trapezoid, I cut it out of one of the sweaters. So, and then, you know, I had it all laid out really nice on Cricut Design Space, but then I couldn't figure out how I was going to make it so that it would look appealing to the eye, because, you know, I can't cut out this gigantic triangle on my Cricut. So I ended up just using a yardstick. Folded my quilt top in half hot dog style and ironed it so that I would know where the center of my quilt was, and then I laid the star out where I wanted it. And then from there, I used my star to angle my yardstick. And I kind of knew where I wanted the bottom corners to be. I drew the big triangle shape for my tree, and then I drew a line at the bottom of the base of the tree so that I would know where that needed to go. And I just lined up the middle of the base of my tree with my star piece. And that is pretty much it. Sorry I didn't film all of that, but now I'm just attaching all the circles. That way I can actually stitch everything down with my machine. I'm really excited how it's turning out. I laid out this quilt so many different times because I just wasn't happy with it. Like, I loved how it looked in Cricut Design Space, but I just couldn't get that to transfer over. But I think once I actually drew the lines on my quilt, it really made a huge difference. So if you make a quilt like this for yourself, I would highly recommend drawing lines. And I just used that Pilot friction pen so that, you know, anytime I applied heat, all the lines would just disappear. So I plan on, once I finish stitching everything down, I will probably hang up the quilt and I'll take my steamer and just steam over everything. That way all those lines disappear and you won't even see it. It's a little scary that I have purple pen all over my white quilt top, but I know all those lines will disappear and it'll be great. So I am going to keep basting these circles on here, and then I will show you guys how I am going to stitch this down.
My mommy is one of the best moms ever.
I'm one of the best moms ever?
The best one ever.
What I do when I do my borders is I cut them to size and then I sew them on there. Well, this time I didn't do that because it was late at night and I was tired. So what I thought was that I could just, you know, make really long strips, because this fabric is 108 inches wide. So I just cut really long strips, the width that I wanted. So I cut these 3 inches wide. And I just went ahead and sewed it along the edge, and I stopped right here. And what I'm going to do, so you can see where the edge of my fabric ended, I'm just gonna cut that right there. And then I'll do the opposite side. So I'm doing the short sides of my quilt first, and then I will sew the long sides of my quilt. So I feel like this just saves me some time. Is it wasting fabric? Probably not, because I'll probably end up using this for the binding, so it's really not even a big deal. Next, I'm going to take this, I'm going to press it to the dark side, and then I'll come back and I'll sew the long edges on my quilt. And then I'm gonna be ready for the batting, and I'm so excited about that. But I'll have to wait to do long edges of my quilt until after I feed my youngest, because she just woke up. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time with them, and then a little bit of time with her and with her brother, and then I will come back. So I know I probably freaked out some people when I wrote on this white with this really purple pen. I used that friction pen that I was telling you about in some of my other videos. All gone. So no need to worry, it came off perfectly. At night. So I just finished drawing out my lines and all my circles. So all the lines that are on here, I'm going to straight line stitch over it with my walking foot. So I've got all these down here. what I ended up doing around the whole tree was drawing a bunch of circles. I don't know if you can see them, but I drew a bunch of circles. And then in some of the circles, I did little snowflakes. So I am going to work on doing that. I'm going to use white thread so that you'll see this really cool design with all the circles and the snowflakes and the lines on the back, because the back of my quilt is red. And it'll be really, really cool when you flip it over. Once I started sewing circles, I realized I was not very good at sewing the circles. And because I used white thread for the front and the back, you could really see where I messed up on the circles on the back of the quilt. So I decided to scrap that whole thing. I spent forever going through and seam ripping all of the circles that I did for the background of the quilt. And now I'm going through and I'm seam ripping all of the straight line quilting that I did on the back of the quilt, because again, you can just see it all and it just doesn't work. And I'm going to see if I can do white thread on top and do a red thread on the back of the quilt. So my bobbin thread will be red, see if that helps. And I decided that I'm just going to do straight lines on the whole quilt instead of doing a bunch of circles, because I think that's going to work a lot better. If I'm not happy with what I'm doing, I'm not going to be happy sending it off to somebody, and somebody has paid for this and I want to make sure that it is like almost as perfect as I can get it, because I know nothing is perfect, but I can try and make it as perfect as I can. This is kind of the design that I decided to go for on the front of the quilt instead of all the circles that I had drawn. Luckily I used that Pilot pen, that Pilot friction pen, so I just went over it with an iron to get rid of all of those circles. So I ended up just doing an outline of the tree and following it all the way through. So I've got some really cool, like almost is going to be herringbone. I'm not going to go that far, I'm just going to go up and then turn. I just haven't gone back through and hit that with heat to get rid of all those awkward lines. Same thing for up here, those are kind of awkward lines, but this is the new design. I think I'm going to be a lot happier with it. And again, let me show you the back just so you can see. Like another thing that really was driving me nuts was I did like a forward and back stitch and it just left all these weird little pieces of thread, like really thick pieces of thread, and I think that's really ugly. And again, I just can't give somebody something that I've spent time on and that they paid for that I'm not happy with. So I'm gonna rip all these out. I've already started ripping all that out, and I've got a lot more to go.
Where's Black Skull? I say again, where's Black Skull?
What is Black Skull?
You know exactly what I'm talking about.
What are you talking about?
Thanks.
Listen, you're coming with us regardless, so. Yep.
Hold her there.
Baker. Pink Skull is on the ground. She's on the ground. Where is he, Pink Skull? Start talking. He's right there! This is Black Skull. Are you Black Skull? No, this is Carrie 5. Yeah. Pink Skull down. Pink Skull. She's running. She's on the run.
Get back here, you! That's the end of our mission. Thank you. Bye.
You can plug your iron back in.